Hello, everybody, and welcome to React Universe on Air, brought to you by Callstack. My name is Mike. I'm CTO and founder at Callstack and core contributor to React Native. And today with me is a very special guest, Mustafa from Shopify. Mustafa, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, and the topic we have today is very special and exciting, which is your migration to React Native. And when I started preparing, this podcast, I initially wanted to do it real quick, but then I realized you've been sharing things throughout many years, I think dating back to like pre-COVID era about your migration. So I guess before we dive deep into this, how about you tell us a bit about yourself, what you do at Shopify, and how long you've been doing doing React Native there and supervising different things?
Sure. So I'm a director of engineering at Shopify. I've been here for over 7 years now. I lead the team that builds the Shopify mobile app, and I'm also leading work on mobile foundations at Shopify. So all the common components that we have that we share between all of our apps, and also mobile app security for all of our apps. Based in Toronto, and we've been doing React Native since 2020 now. We've dabbled with React Native before that, but we really started using it in production from 2020 onwards.
Yeah, I think, if I remember correct, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you did try it very early on, right? Like 2015, and you did have some results, not ready for production, but you did circle back in 2020 again, right?
Yeah, a few times. So over the years, we evaluated React Native and a few other technologies several times. And finally, in 2020, we thought that it was ready enough for us to go all in. So that's why we made the change.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So I'm curious, what was your stack historically across all these platforms before you sort of started, adding React Native pieces to it?
Yeah, so we've been doing mobile at Shopify for a very long time now. So we started off with Java and Objective-C back in the day, then moved to Kotlin and Swift, and eventually to React Native around 5 years ago.
Nice. And you mentioned that you did evaluate React Native alongside other technologies. So I'm curious, what are other technologies that you were looking at?
Yeah, initially we looked at making native development easier. So we looked at things like Jetpack Compose and Swift UI. Back in 2020, they were in very early stages, so they weren't really ready for production use at our scale. We looked at Flutter as well, but it had some drawbacks that made it not the best option for us. So, and React Native ticked a lot of boxes for us. So that's why we went with React Native.
Yeah, and I'm curious about those boxes because I guess, when you make this such a big decision for organizations such as Shopify, there is a lot of things across, business, tech that you have to make sure, are working well together. So, if you could maybe share with us some of the things that, are on your checklist when you decide, okay, this is the tech that we're going all in.
Yeah, I mean, before we do that, let's talk about the main motivation behind even looking at other alternatives. So we wanted to solve 3 main problems that we had. First is we wanted to stop building the same features twice. It's a lot of work just rebuilding the same thing once on iOS and once on Android. And we're also building it on web, so we're building the same thing thrice actually. The second thing was that we wanted the ability for our engineers to work seamlessly across web, iOS, and Android. Previously, it was just not possible. So if web devs wanted to contribute to mobile, the learning curve was very steep. You had to learn completely new languages and frameworks, and it's really hard to be able to do that. The third thing is that we're spending a lot of time chasing feature parity. So you build a feature on iOS, and then you have to build it again on Android. But then no matter how hard you try, there are subtle differences between them, or sometimes it's very common in mobile where a feature or a product is released first on iOS, then Android is forever playing catch up. We wanted to eliminate that whole class of problems. So that's why we started looking at frameworks like this. So once we realized there are ways to solve this problem, we started looking at what are the best solutions for us. And React Native in particular was very interesting because no one is backed by a company like Meta. Second thing is we already had a ton of JavaScript and TypeScript expertise at the company and a lot of infrastructure and tooling that we could reuse. Plus, it's much easier for a web dev who's already very familiar with TypeScript and JavaScript and React to learn React Native and contribute on mobile as well, versus something like Dart, which is a completely different language. And then, as far as I know, it's not used very widely outside of Flutter. So it just makes the case much weaker, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, as far as I can tell, these are the things that, brought a lot of big companies to React Native, reusing or being able to sort of share the existing React knowledge, carrying over. I'm curious to, when we talk about migration to React Native, and I happen to have these conversations every once in a while, there is always this question, what is the actual end effect on your existing native teams? So I'm curious, what was the reaction from, your native engineers? Were they excited, skeptical? Did they become React Native engineers? How did that turn out for them?
It was a combination of all of those things that you mentioned. Some engineers were very excited about learning a new language and framework. Some were apprehensive, and understandably so, right? Like, you spend a lot of time developing expertise in one thing, and then if you have to do something different, it's a big change. And my favorite thing about mobile development, and I've been doing mobile for a long time, is how passionate we are about our craft. Like, we take a lot of pride in like obsessing over details and like having the best user experience and caring about every single pixel and performance and things like that. So yes, there was some pushback. And the way that things turned out was, we encourage everybody on our teams to actually try React Native before forming an opinion. What I see even now is, especially if you talk about React Native online, social media and such, there are like people have very strong feelings and they're just like defending one side or the other. Like, vast majority of people, if you actually dig into it, like haven't really tried it. They just like have heard other people's opinion and just like repeat that because it validates what they think is true, right? So our biggest push for internally was like, hey, everybody, let's just try it out, because code doesn't lie. It either works well or it doesn't, right? So we encourage everybody to try it out. And then that changed a lot of things, because people are like, yeah, I tried this a while ago, but now it's a lot better. There are some rough edges, but they're surmountable. We can fix these things. And there are a few people, a very small number of people, who did not want to do React Native, and we found other roles for them inside the company, and they're happy doing other things. The opposite happened a lot more, where we had web devs like, finally we can do mobile as well. So like, fine, let's have them come in and do mobile work with the team.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I read on your blog, which I think is an insight that many people miss, is that adapting React Native doesn't really mean that your native engineers will actually have to, be fired, let's say it this way, because the conclusion from your blog post literally was that they actually have still a lot of things to do. Even on the React Native application itself, somebody has to do the native code, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think like the biggest learning that we got out of this migration to React Native over the last 5 years by migrating all of our apps was that you cannot build world-class apps at scale with React Native without native devs.
Yeah.
You cannot replace the taste and experience that comes with building high-quality mobile apps. And 100% React Native should be an anti-goal.
Yeah.
I see a lot of teams and companies like, okay, we'll do everything in React Native, and then it doesn't go well. Well, that shouldn't be a surprise, because at the end of the day, you have to use the right technology for the job. And native is still the right technology for a bunch of different things. So just use native for that, and then use React Native for the rest. So that way you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, totally. I smile because I remember actually literally your tweet where you say that anti-goal thing. I know you talk about it quite often, and I totally agree. And actually, I think that some of the companies, the reason they were not happy with React Native is because they thought they were going to be 100% all in on React, and that's where you start to see some drawbacks. Cool. So, after you made the decision, you obviously had to play around with it, and I know you sort of started small with some applications. So I'm curious, what were those apps? Why did you choose them? And then did you have any learnings early on that sort of paved the way for further adoption of React Native?
Yeah, so we started off by doing very small prototypes and then grew it from there.
Yeah.
The first big app that we used React Native on was the Shop app. It is currently the second. It's ranked number 2 on the top free apps list in the App Store right now. It's massively
Wow.
popular, millions of users, and we were building that app around that time, and we started using React Native, and we saw very good results with that. And then based on the learnings from that app, we started adopting React Native in all of our other apps as well. The next big app that we use React Native on was our point of sale app. So this is an app that people use in physical brick and mortar stores. So let's say you want to buy shoes, you go to the store, you pick what you want, and then you go to the counter, and the sales staff at that point basically uses that app to get the transaction done. The interesting thing about that app is that people actually use it at twice the speed of normal apps, because these are like sales staff who use the app for 8+ hours a day, and they don't even look at the screen. They just like go off of muscle memory, and it's like bang, bang, bang. It's very fast. So that was a good testing ground for us, because if we can use React Native to build a really fast app that works for that kind of use case, it should be good enough for pretty much anything else.
Yeah.
So coincidentally, right around the time we made the decision to move to React Native, we were doing a big rewrite of that app, because it started off as a hackathon project and just like ballooned from there and became really popular. And then we had a lot of tech debt. And we were going to do a massive UX overhaul. So we decided to rewrite it from scratch in React Native. And that went really well. Then we started adopting it on some new apps that we were building, like Balance. And those apps were built from scratch with React Native. And that worked really well too. And then finally, the last app that we just recently finished migrating to React Native is the main Shopify app. That is our biggest app, but it had over 800 screens. So we kept it to the end and then migrated it recently.
That is really cool. And I used to be a customer on the Shopify app actually, but I did shut down my shop. So I can't testify. I can test the React Native one right now, but maybe I should reconsider. Anyway, you mentioned the muscle memory. I actually was taking invoice yesterday from a restaurant, and I saw the cashier, typing so quickly, not even looking at the screen. That was crazy, and that made me realize one question, which is, how did you even prioritize the sort of like, how did you pick the screen that you wanted to start with on the, say, point of sale application? A lot of things can go wrong. So did you go all in, or did you choose something that was sort of low risk component that doesn't require that high, that low latency interaction?
That particular app we were rebuilding. So we basically built the main cart screen first and made sure that we got the right performance. And then we started building out additional features. And then we rolled it out in a phased manner. So we initially did a lot of testing internally. Then we made it available to a small percentage of early access users, made sure that it worked well, fixed some issues that we found, and then gradually rolled it out to our entire user base. It was also like a big UX overhaul. So our merchants had to train their staff how to use the new version. So that's why we had to go a little slower. But in general, like what we like to do is tackle the hardest problems first. There's no point of tiptoeing around them. So when we see a big issue, let's just address it and then move on, versus like keeping it, towards the end and then dreading to tackle it and things like that. So if you can get that out of the way, everything else becomes a lot easier.
So should I interpret it as, I think one of the most popular ways of sort of adapting React Native is this start with something that, can, if it breaks, everything's fine. What I'm getting from you is that is okay, but if you have this big component that is maybe crucial for you and, it's making your business, lose some money, let's start with that one because there is no point keeping that till the very end.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you cannot solve that problem. What happens then if you leave it to the end? It's a big issue. Then, like, do you have to all that work that you did leading up to that point is throwaway, right? So might as well just embrace the pain and then just like see how you can fix those problems and then move on.
Yeah, that's very interesting insight. I think many people they sort of, I wouldn't say defer the decision of like going all in with React Native, but I'm sure when people start adapting React Native, they want to see some results and maybe make the final decision. And sometimes the decision becomes obvious without even making it. It's like, why don't you just make the call and just go all in? So I guess, yeah, that is pretty interesting. So that was a full rewrite, but I'm curious if you did notice any immediate benefits of like this application running on top of React Native. Did you share any code from different places, or were you able to test some, I don't know, scenarios that you had in mind?
Well, I mean, the thing about our migration to React Native is that we did not use the same approach for every app, right? The point of sale app happened to be like we're doing a rewrite around the same time, so we just started building it with React Native. The main Shopify app was already built in React in native for over 10 years. So we introduced React Native into it. We didn't do a full rewrite. We migrated the entire app to React Native. So for that app, we added React Native to an existing native code base, built a few small screens just to get everything working, and then we decided to migrate the entire app. So for that particular app, what we did was we migrated the main screen of the app to React Native. So it has 4 tabs, and then those tabs basically get majority of the traffic. So our hypothesis was that if React Native works well for these screens, it will work for everything else. And one of the things that I did for this migration was that a feature cannot be called migrated until you also delete the old code, the native code. Now, we started seeing a lot of interesting things after this. So we, every time we deleted code, our builds got faster. And then it started becoming like a contest internally. We're like, who can delete the most amount of code, right? Because people started seeing.
Yeah, right.
The other big benefit that we saw was hot reloads. So much nicer. Like that was our biggest pain point with native. Every time you make a change, it took several minutes for things to appear on your screen. It was a massive drag on our productivity. And React Native, that problem doesn't exist. So it's so much nicer.
Yeah, that is definitely, I think, one of the biggest benefits. And it is easy to take it for granted if you're in React Native for like, 8 years or something. But, coming from the native world where you have those build times can be really huge. I'm curious, do you have anything comes to your mind when you think about your setup with my sort of React Native inside your application, the so-called Brownfield way? There is, many different ways this can be done, and there are, do's and don'ts. People have their preferences. Is there anything about your integration specifically that you think, stands out, or any lessons learned in that aspect?
The end goal of our integration was to make the code base idiomatically React Native. We did not want to stay Brownfield forever. So the final thing we did in the migration was to convert the Brownfield code base to a Greenfield React Native code base, because then otherwise you have to continuously just like keep maintaining it. There are
it's not migrated.
Exactly, right? So our goal right from day one was this is like deprecated. We need to get rid of this at the end. We are only doing this just to migrate the app, but after it's done, we'll get rid of it.
Yeah, that is really nice. Did you already know, like when you started rewriting those apps or migrating React Native into them, when you made the decision that this is happening, were you aware of like some of the limitations that you ended up solving throughout that journey? I'm talking about flash list or React Native performance. Is this something that you were sort of factoring into your journey as a sort of cost of adapting the technology, or it is something that caught you as a surprise on the way to full migration?
Yeah, no, we were very much aware of these rough edges in React Native, and we learned about all these things, especially because we did a lot of code. We wrote a lot of code instead of just listening to what other people had to say. We were like, okay, let's just write code and see what's what, right? That's the best way to get to the truth. So we were aware of these issues, and we made a bet. So Shopify in general has this philosophy that we basically make a bet on an early stage technology and go all in, and we become experts at it. And then we contribute. We don't just use it, we also contribute back and make it better. No technology is perfect, no framework is perfect. Everything has its own pros and cons, but we want to be experts at the technologies that we are using. So we did the same thing back in the day with Ruby and Rails. When Shopify started, Rails was a very niche framework that only a few people used. And then we jumped on it, and it has become a really big success story because we were able to ship so much faster than enterprise Java teams, for instance. We did the same thing with React Native as well. We knew going in that there were some problems, and we wanted to help fix these problems, not just use the framework.
Yeah, I guess that's actually pretty exciting. I think, if somebody wants to stay on top, they should probably just sort of mimic your direction. But I really like how you sort of phrased it. I wanted to ask you about your sort of open source, like reasoning behind open sourcing things, but you already kind of answered my question with your attitude. I think this is pretty nice that you sort of make a bet and you go all in. I think there are a lot of companies that do not. They have a lot of exciting CI/CD and internal tech. They just don't open source it. And, I'm sure you also have some stuff. But at the same time, when I look at your GitHub, there is a bunch of different tools, a native and the React Native that you use and we also use, which I think is great for just being a citizen of this community.
I mean, building software is a team sport, in our opinion. So we want to give back, not just consume it. And like at a high level, the way that we think about this is, let's say there's a problem that we are running into. If somebody out there is already solving that problem really well, we want to support them. So a good example of that is the work that we are doing with people building React Native Skia or Reanimated, for instance.
Yeah.
In other cases where like there's a problem, nobody is solving it, or the solutions aren't good enough, we end up solving those problems for ourselves first, test the solution at our scale in all of our apps, and then make it available to the community. We don't want to ship something that kind of works some of the time, right? So that's how we approach these things.
Yeah, I remember one of your one of your engineers had a talk at I believe it was our conference, but if I'm making a mistake, I'm sorry. It was Marek. And he did talk about flash lists, and I'm hoping that everything I just said is correct. But there was this talk, 100%. And when he started talking about the way you engineered this list, how fast it is, it was mind-blowing to me. But at the same time, it became very evident that if you decided to make a bet on React Native, that eventually was going to happen, because there is a lot of things you can scroll in the app, right? So this has to be quick. And actually, with that in mind, I do have a question, because lists and scrolling was a big issue in React Native. And I'm sure you were aware of it. But were you 100% confident that you will fix it no matter what? Or was there any time when you were like, there might be a chance we might not be able to do it with React Native?
We saw the risk, but then we de-risked it by doing a lot of prototyping. So what is in Flash List right now in the GitHub project, we prototyped several times, several versions of that. So we knew we had a high level of confidence that we could fix it. And it was all a matter of just applying ourselves and trying to figure out like how to make it work. Plus, we also work closely with Meta. So we are seeing the work that they were doing in the framework itself to improve performance. So we anticipated that performance is going to get better. And we thought, okay, this is one area that we can invest in, make things better.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with that in mind, moving towards the sort of thing that I think got attention of everybody, the announcement of the migration being completed. I assume the application is now Greenfield, following your taxonomy, which is awesome. This is great because, I always think that, this cross-platform effort, it's a journey, and sometimes people just get stuck on the way. So every time I see somebody actually completing it, I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. So how long did it take? And more importantly, what was the original timeline? And was it accurate or not? How did that turn out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the original estimate for migrating the Shopify app to React Native was 3 years. And like I said, this is our biggest app, over 800 screens. It was built over a decade. And we finished migrating it recently in a little over 2 years.
Nice. So that is faster, right?
Much faster, but
yeah.
The thing to note here is that we did not stop everything and just migrated the app. We also shipped a bunch of new features along the way. So that is an important distinction. If we had stopped shipping features, we could have get this done a lot faster. But yeah, we were shipping new features as well.
Yeah, I guess it is sort of blowing my mind throughout this whole podcast how how great engineers you have on board, not just from pure execution perspective and libraries, but also just the level of sort of development proficiency, getting migration of such a big application, in such a time. It's purely remarkable. So you sort of highlighted this earlier. What is your strategy for migrations? But I'm curious if you remember what was the first React Native screen in that application and what was the last one.
So we first started using React Native on some like small setting screens and like new screens that we were building just to get the framework into the code base and set up tooling and things like that. And once we were happy with the state of things, we officially started the migration. And for that, like I said, we first migrated the home screen of the apps, the 4 tabs. And that was a good way for us to validate our approach. And also, it also helped us develop some patterns that we could use to migrate rest of the screens. The next stage was migrating all the critical screens of the app to React Native. So these were screens that most of our users use most of the time, right? So 80+% of usage basically happens in these screens. So we then migrated all these screens. The next stage was migrating all the other screens. So these were screens that needed to be in the app, but are not used as often. So we migrated all of them. So that's like 500 plus screens now in total. We deleted a bunch of screens that did not need to exist in the app because over time people added a bunch of things, but then those reasons are not valid anymore. So deleting code is the best option. We love deleting code. And then finally, the last thing that we did was migrate the app foundation to React Native. So networking, GraphQL, state management, identity, all the things that work behind the scenes to make an app function. We migrated all of that to React Native, converted the code base to be greenfield React Native, and then called the migration done.
Yeah, and for the until that happened, you did have state management on the native side. So I assume there was some sort of a mechanism to keep the React Native and native in sync.
Yeah, so we did a lot of like work just to have this state where some part of the app is native and some part of it is React Native, plus some infrastructure so that like you could go from a native screen to a React Native screen to a native screen temporarily. Like we had to support all that because we couldn't just stop development on the app and just migrate everything. So we did all that work, but then we got rid of it. Like I said.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess in terms of deleted code on Twitter, you mentioned 1.8 million lines of code deleted, right? That's quite a lot. I mean, I'm not sure how many you have. Is that a lot or not? Like considering your application size in total.
Yeah, I mean it's a decent amount of code. I think, like I said, we kind of got obsessed about deleting code, and then there were competitions internally, like who could delete the most code. So it was a lot.
Yeah. When I saw your tweets, I was like, this guy's passionate about it. I mean, you can see you being driven by that number. I love it. So you mentioned some legacy screens. I'm curious, what sort of contributes to that number? I'm sure many people are interested to sort of learn what is cross-platform benefit in practice. Is that 1.8 million just purely getting rid of 2 platforms, or there was a bunch of legacy code that you just got rid on the way, sort of cleaning things up?
It was both. So a bunch of it was just like native screens that we migrated to React Native. Also native screens that did not need to exist in the app. There's a bunch of like old code that was auto-generated and it was there, like some previous migrations that were never completed and things like that. So this was a good opportunity for us to just go ahead and just clean everything. And yeah, we had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, I can totally relate. Do you keep like an internal leaderboard or something like that, or how do you sort of compete against each other with the?
Yeah, so every time that somebody deletes like a big chunk of code, they post about it in our group chat, and then people celebrate and things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can only imagine, every Slack has their own unique set of emojis that only employees understand. So I'm sure you have a lot of fun there as well. So on Twitter as well, you did mention 86% of Codebase across both platforms is now unified, which is awesome. I'm curious, what is that remaining 14%?
Yeah, So like I said, 100% React Native is an anti-goal for us. We use native for things that it is really good at. So things like widgets, Siri shortcut, Apple Watch app, watch complications, things like that, we still build in native. We also use native for things like 2D and 3D scanning, so using camera or using the LiDAR sensor on your phone. We also look at things like running AI models locally on device, and native is usually the best. It's currently the right technology for that, so we use native technology for that.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of use of like local LLMs right now, but I did came across this video of Google showcasing something with Shopify inside Shopify app, and that was, I guess, for image editing and processing.
Yeah, so background removal and generation. So you could take a picture of a product and we can remove the background for you and create generate a background. So you can have like a studio lighting and everything without actually having
Yeah,
a studio.
that's pretty sick. So React Native, like up until now, we've been talking about your apps in terms of mobile, pretty much. I'm curious if you share. I guess you sort of highlighted this already. If you share any code with React on the web, and what is your sort of recommendation or point of view in that aspect as well? Do you have any goals, anti-goals as far as sharing code across, different platforms of React and React Native?
Yeah, so the app that we share the most amount of code between mobile and web is the Inbox app. So that app uses React Native Web to build the web app and React Native to build the mobile app. We share about 75% of the business logic between mobile and web using React Native Web there. So that has been a very interesting use case for us. We do share some code between web and mobile, mostly through the JavaScript and TypeScript. So libraries that work on both platforms. So that is working well. We want to increase it. We're also looking at like new things that are happening in that area. So we are keeping close tabs on React Strict DOM, which seems like a very interesting solution, but still very early stages. But we're interested in seeing what happens there.
Yeah, there is a lot of efforts going on in that aspect for sure. One interesting RFC to look at as well for anybody interested in that aspect is the RFC by Microsoft on web modules. So basically, there is this challenge of React Native web coverage APIs slightly differentiating from web on the sort of behavior and spec compliance. And there are some ideas floating around as well. We'll share it in the notes. So, okay, mobile web, we got it. What about other platforms? React Native runs on TV, runs on Vision OS, WebXR, pretty much everywhere. I'm not sure what is your app landscape, but my question is that a advantage, something that you plan to use anytime in the future?
Yeah, 100%, right? Like that will end up being the default way of, expanding to those platforms. We don't have any products that work on like TVs or in the Vision Pro and things like that right now. But the step, whenever we decide to go down that road, we obviously want to use what we already have and see how that works. And if that doesn't work, then look for alternatives.
Yeah, that is, to be very honest with you, you seem like the person that embraces the React Native ecosystem 100%. I love it. I think, having that in mind, that approach in mind lets you really come to those emerging platforms faster than anybody. So I guess with that in mind, we can move to a few questions about your sort of operations and how did React Native impact that aspect. You already sort of mentioned the build times. Are there any other things that React Native had big impact on regarding, your workflow, collaboration, and development velocity?
Yeah, definitely. Like React Native has given us a step change in velocity. We are able to ship a lot more things much, much faster.
Yeah.
I've talked about this before, but it's worth repeating that like just not having to build the same feature twice is a huge, huge unlock on engineering bandwidth. The other thing is with hot reloading, developers are so much more productive because you don't break flow that way. You make a change, you see it reflect, you go and make another change, you see it reflect. Previously, it used to like, you have to wait for a few minutes for that. And then by the time you forget a lot of times, like what exactly we're trying to do. So all of this has been great. The other thing is that we don't have to ever worry about keeping two platforms in sync. Like one of the things I used to do back in when I was doing native was keep an iPhone and an Android phone side by side and test a feature and note down every single thing that is different. And then you have to go chase and then like open bugs and get that fixed and all that. That is not a problem anymore. So we can spend our time on more interesting things, like solving more user problems than just, just making the same thing work consistently. So all of that has been like a huge game changer.
Yeah, you're way more hardcore than me because I started as an iOS engineer. But when I was asked to build Android, I started looking for alternatives. And that's when I found React Native, because it's like, there is no way I'm learning all that. You did make it up until both platforms. People say often that React Native. I think it happens less frequently now, but every once in a while there is this discussion that React Native just doesn't feel native. I'm curious. What is the perception from your users' perspective? How does the React Native had an impact on UX now that you share so much code across both platforms? Were you able to keep that platform twist on both platforms still?
Yeah, I think like we haven't run into that problem really. The main thing that we've learned over the years is that native automatically doesn't mean fast. React Native automatically doesn't mean slow, right? That may have been true several years ago, but not anymore, right? So, and also, I mean, you contribute back to React Native, so you know this better than anyone else, that like at the end of the day, it's all native code that's running on your device. Like, so it's not anything different, right? The main thing is like, how do you build your app? Do you care about the right things? Do you work on performance and you achieve the goals that you want to hit? And overall, how your app works. Like regular users care more about like whether an app works well and solves their problem more than like what technology is powering it. And React Native at the end of the day uses native under the hood. So it's not like a native versus React Native conversation altogether.
Yeah, exactly. And with that in mind, I guess my last question to you is, and there has been a lot of these throughout this podcast. I think it's one of those podcasts that will surely be very valuable to people that are thinking about it or are either at the beginning or throughout their journey. But I think what I wanted to ask you is what advice would you give to other companies or developers that are considering such a transition and then maybe also are somewhere in the process or just getting stuck?
Yeah, so a few things. Number one, if you haven't tried React Native recently, please do, because it has gotten a lot better in the last 5 years. Second thing is that, I already mentioned this before, 100% React Native should be an anti-goal. Use native for the things that it is best at, and then use React Native for everything else. That way you get the best of both worlds. The third thing I would say is you need good native devs to build a world-class app using React Native. So you cannot really replace that skill. So you need to have a good mix of native and React Native devs working together and leverage their strengths on each platform and then make a really good app. So you need React Native devs to really push the boundaries of what's possible and really build good UI, for instance. You need native devs to go build the native integrations or build extensions, and any place where there are high performance requirements, you could need that ability to go down into native and then do that work. You also need a bunch of native expertise to do like React Native upgrades, for instance. So you can't really just like do away without that. The last thing I would tell them is make performance a priority from the start. And this applies to any technology and framework really. But the main thing here is that if you ship a bunch of code and then realize that you have a performance problem, it's really hard to go back and fix it. Versus if you focus on it from the start, it makes your life a lot easier. So I would say set a good, like a good ambitious goal and then work relentlessly towards achieving that goal. And once you hit that goal, do the work to maintain that performance, because it's very easy to regress. So focus on performance from the start so that you don't have to worry about it later.
Yeah, thank you. These are great advices, and I 100% agree with you. And I think I lied to you because there is one more question I have, which is, there is so much happening in this community every day. People are shipping every day like crazy. What are you most excited about? Any particular developments happening that you're sort of following yourself?
I mean, in general, the future of React Native is pretty bright. The community is thriving. I think Meta has been a great steward of the project. We are very excited about the new architecture, and we're trying to migrate our apps to the new architecture soon. And in general, we are excited about working with Meta and the rest of the community to make React Native better.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Mustafa, I really wanted to thank you for coming to this podcast. And I think, I really want to say, I would like to thank you for a lot of things, but I guess I really loved how you share knowledge with the community. And in the show notes, we're linking some of the articles that you shared throughout the time. And I've been reading some of them, preparing to this podcast, and just the amount of details you share behind your decisions, such as your methodology for, sort of the ordering screens by priority. This is such a huge knowledge to the community. I think everybody should go ahead and read it. So with that in mind, I really wanted to thank you. It's been a pleasure, and what I can say is, please give us some feedback about this podcast. Follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and follow Mustafa as well. Mustafa, are you on Blue Sky already, or
not yet? No.
I see. Okay. So not yet. Just follow Mustafa on Twitter. Follow us on Blue Sky and X as well. And make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. That's where you can learn about new podcast episodes, and that's where we will be sharing materials like this. And with that in mind, I once again wanted to thank you. And one thing that I didn't tell you from the very beginning is that this is the first podcast that I'm doing after 2 years break out of the community. So it's been a pleasure. And I think we had such a great discussion about, quite an achievement, I can say.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.